I'm very lucky to be joined here by Waffle to the left. Once you see his videos, you will certainly recognize the only good thing to come out of 2020 so far. I think we were very lucky to also be having a brand new video. Originally, when we pitched this, we asked people to create a pre-recorded video. Because of time constraints and whatnot, everyone was able to do so. And then Waffle, who creates absolute masterpieces as it was, actually went on and created a full video, which looks to be absolutely beautiful. So we will jump to that. Before I do so, I want to welcome Sean to the group, to the conference here. How are you?
Hey, good, thanks. Been really enjoying this conference. The ideas are like wild. They're blowing my mind. Everyone here is so great. Have we not had a revolution yet? Is my next question.
Yes. So if you like, I can go straight to the video now and we can discuss afterward, or if you like, you can give us a bit of an intro.
Yeah, sure. I'll just give a preamble here about it. I literally finished it in the wee hours of this morning and watched it over breakfast. And there's a few flubs in there, so excuse that I crammed to get it done. But we're going to be talking about planning the economy and looking back at some of the history of that in the country and sort of how we can organize around that to deliver all of our base needs. So I'll let myself take it away, I guess.
Excellent. Okay, so without any further ado, let's get into a brand new Waffle to the Left video debuting here on the Ideas to Save the World conference. I apologize for the streaming text on the bottom there. That's the setup we have. I'll fix that shortly. Let's get to it.
All right, Joey.
What is the plan to make sure people have access to testing? What's the plan to make sure our seniors are no longer bearing the brunt of COVID-19? What's the plan to make sure families who need childcare can get access to it? And what's the plan to make sure when we get past the second wave that it isn't everyday families struggling to get by that pay the price, but those who have profited off this pandemic who pay the price for the recovery?
Honestly though, what is the plan to clean up this mess? We're partway through the second major economic collapse of the 2000s, and it's now certain that in every industrial country, some form of planning must replace the disintegrating capitalist system. We've seen how unprepared we were for the coronavirus and for climate change in the hands of a small group of capitalist magnates operating in their own interests. What if the planning was done by public servants acting in the public interest and responsible to the people as a whole? Isn't that better than the failing liberal conservative duopoly?
It is 2020, and the virus is certain to dominate politics in the months ahead.
The second wave has been ramping up for weeks all across the country, and it's funny that our leaders seem to have been caught off guard by this, given that they were telling us that COVID would be with us for 18 months way back in March.
Canadians talk to me about the fact that they are worried about their jobs, about how they're making ends meet. Canadians are suffering, and this government does not have a plan to address that, and instead prefers to spin and spend money on reassuring everyone that the government has it all in control, as Canadians feel fraying around the edges of our economy.
That's still relevant today. Friends of the show will recognize the disproportionate impact that unemployment, as well as the health and economic fallout, has had on women, racialized, and low-income people. Half of people making less than $16 an hour and 43% of youth have lost work, and we're facing down the highest unemployment rate since the Great Depression.
In the face of change, our greatest generation showed us that overcoming crisis isn't easy. They didn't give up, and neither can we.
When I saw that the press ran with this wartime response idea, I decided to dust off the old books and tapes to see how they handled it back then, and I found some hot takes for the left to organize around today.
In 1937, when the CCF proposed in the House of Commons a $500 million program to put single unemployed to work, the Minister of Finance said, "Where'll we get the money?" Mr. Benson asked the same question today. My reply at that time was that if we were to go to war, the minister would find the money. And it turned out to be true.
In Make This Year Canada, CCFers recall how the government rejected any social spending in 1932. You couldn't get $1 million a year to help working class people. But when the war machine got going, $13 million was spent every single day. In Party of Conscience, the authors recall that the national income tripled over that decade. Unemployment became full employment. We planned our way out of an existential threat and defeated fascism. For a while anyway.
In 1939, when we declared war against Nazi Germany, for the first time we used the Bank of Canada to make financially possible what was physically possible. We took 1 million men and women and put them in uniform. We fed and clothed and armed them. The rest of people of Canada went to work. The government organized over 100 crown corporations. We manufactured things that had never been manufactured before. We gave our farmers and fishermen guaranteed prices, and they produced more food than we'd ever produced in peacetime. In order to prevent profiteering and inflation, we fixed prices, and we did it all without borrowing a single dollar from outside of Canada.
The Wartime Prices and Trade Board was created to stabilize the economy. People had guaranteed wages and the cost of goods was fixed to ensure affordability. And sure, it wasn't a perfect system, but even with all that public spending and subsidizing, inflation increased a steady 2.8% over the decade. Contrast that with the price fixing and hero pay we see today, where the flat wage increases over the past 4 decades, even as productivity has increased 50%. We need a plan to achieve that 420-69 work week. In Arming the Nation, the author shows off how workers saw an average wage increase of nearly 60% over just 5 years. Incomes outpaced inflation. People ate better and spent more, all despite any rationing controls. And 250,000 women went to work for the first time, making nearly as much as men, no doubt. The economy was run like one big company, with careful planning and allocation of materials. Large factories would outsource to smaller ones, so work was decentralized across the country. Virtually every city and province got some action. Tens, if not hundreds of crown corporations were created, and entirely new industries alongside them. Of course, there were complaints to be made. Tommy Douglas himself dragged the corporate titans running many of these crown corporations, saying, instead of government taking over industry, industry had taken over government. But with billions invested, the government produced goods valued over $100 billion in 2005 prices, and the gross national product doubled in just 6 years. Of course, I don't want to romanticize the war machine that produced hundreds of thousands of weapons and armored vehicles, but I mean, not much has really changed. We've just got a different buyer, one that Canadians are against selling to. So just to make sure my message is clear.
My message to you is that we have in Canada the resources, the technical know-how, and the industrious people who could make this a great land if we were prepared to bring these various factors together in building a planned economy dedicated to meeting human needs and responding to human wants.
Exactly. Instead of struggling to re-engage a failing economic system, we should pull a Ho Chi Minh and focus on delivering the base human needs to all. I'm talking about the establishment of a planned, socialized economic order that will make possible the most efficient, low-emission, and economical development of the national resources and the most equitable distribution of the national income, and to carry on continuous research into all branches of the national economy in order to acquire the detailed information necessary to efficient planning. The authors of Social Planning for Canada lay out similar criteria for which industry to socialize and how to prioritize that momentous task. Is it a key industry? Is it operated under the conditions of a monopoly? Is it seriously inefficient? And does it control important natural resources? And I know what you're thinking, but how, Waffle? Well, they outline a variety of ownership and management models as well. For example, holding companies and trusts owned by the state, so think Canada Post, or municipal scale operations like the TTC. There's also cooperatives like the ubiquitous credit unions of Saskatchewan, and nonprofit trusts like community land trusts. Each has pros and cons when put in context, but if done right, they decentralize and distribute power while creating cooperation within and amongst communities and industries that depend on each other.
Looking out for one another isn't something Canadians do. It's who we are. It's just our nature.
They even outline a few essential pillars of the socialized economy, like banking and investment, transport and communication, power and fuel, and, well, a whole bunch of other ones, including food production, which is where we're going to start, because cosmopolitan soy boys like me are rich in avocado toasts, but rural areas across the country face outrageous prices for staple goods, which make it a struggle just to stay healthy. And in areas in northern Ontario, people spend half their income on food. The same basket of food in Attawapiskat, Fort Albany, or Moose Factory costs more than double what it would in Toronto.
When we talk about socialism or public ownership, we talk of it as part of democratic economic planning. I think the Canadian people know now that they haven't got very much economic freedom.
A 2014 study found that a fifth of single fathers and more than a third of single mothers struggle to afford food for their families. On average, more than 12% of people across the country are food insecure. And it's over 36% in Nunavut, where a higher percentage of the population faces severe food insecurity than the total percentages almost everywhere else. More than 40% of the Inuit populations from northeast to northwest face at least moderate food insecurity, and that number jumps above 70% for their populations in Nunavut specifically. And it's getting food to these remote areas that's a big reason why.
Within a 2-week period, we watched vegetables go from like $3 for a head of lettuce up to almost $6. Strawberries, you go further north, it can be like $18 for a pound.
Unable to afford those healthy foods, many northern people don't buy them. It's led to more cases of diabetes, kidney disease, digestive issues. In an effort to help their people eat better, Opaskwayak Cree Nation put in a small vertical farm in February, and already they've produced a huge crop.
As of last week, we had about 960 bags of lettuce.
Vertical farms have a huge potential to localize food production, to stock remote areas in the north or high-consumption inner cities. It's one of those silver bullet clean economy solutions, low in water demand and flexible to set up in empty warehouses or offices pretty much anywhere. It's a market that's projected to triple over the next few years, and all of these components could be manufactured here, with both that production and the automated use factored into carbon budgeting.
They can grow up to 3,000 heads of lettuce per week here. All of it is automatically fed and watered on a timer.
When you plant in the field, you're using too much water. We use about 10% of the water that you would normally use in the field.
Organically certified seeds are germinated in a controlled environment.
I love my job because I'm feeling like I'm making a difference in terms of our impact on the planet through food production.
Oh, I'm just an old-time farmer, if you will, from the dairy farm. And this is great. It's way better than the field. It's much cleaner.
But we can look to the field as an opportunity as well. The 2020 Greenbelt report shows that good things like pears, grapes, and strawberries can still grow in Ontario. And socializing this supply chain wouldn't be too hard. You just go like that. Oh, what's that dotted oval about? Oh boy, okay, how do we socialize this? I don't know, you tell me. If we can figure it out though, then we've got a $100 million opportunity. Farmers could increase production of those fruits by anywhere from 2 to 8 times, as well as staples like garlic and eggplant and sweet potatoes, which could reach up to 80% of consumption.
Canadians think they know about the potatoes, but my God, do we eat a lot of potatoes. Do you know how many potatoes we eat?
No, I don't, Rick. How many potatoes?
I will tell you, 154 pounds of potatoes each.
And I wish you'd eat more.
I bet. It's astounding. It's also 50% of our vegetable intake is potatoes.
Well, they're so good for you, Rick.
They are.
Who knew that PEI was a low-key communist hideout?
Look at that! Look at that! The Sputnik's on!
I think Rick likes to visit farms, and it's a handy plot device.
This is wheat and barley country. If you like bread or beer or both, and who doesn't, thank a farmer.
For almost a century, Western farmers pooled and sold their wheat through a single-desk co-op. The Canadian Wheat Board got their grain to port by managing shipments through orderly marketing. The farmers were worried about their individual power, but because they sold together and the quality was so good, the board was able to secure the highest price customers were willing to pay, and with long-term contracts too. Basically, farmers were paid guaranteed rates for the grain year-round. In a bad year, the government absorbed the loss, but if the pool net a profit, the farmers took that home or invested in their communities.
The Saskatchewan Wheat Pool was born in 1924. They started off with elevator number 1 at Beaulieu, Saskatchewan. They numbered 2, 3, 4, and so on. Our elevator was built in 1928. It has a number on it of 901. So they either purchased or built 900 elevators in 4 years.
But in 2015, the Harper government sold the CWB to a US and Saudi-owned company called G3, and the government actually broke the law by ignoring the farmers' vote to keep the board.
Over the summer, Western producers voted and spoke out in favor of the single desk. So why is this government failing to listen to Western farmers' voices? Why is it so deeply in the pocket of big agra? And when will it stop taking the West for granted?
And a lot of farmers want to re-establish the board because they're earning less under the privatized model. Terry Boehm, the former head of the National Farmers Union, says that they're getting 1970s prices. It's not just them. The rail union and the entire town of Churchill, Manitoba want the board back. But let's put a pin in that for just a sec.
Alberta now leads the country in hemp production. Analysts say the crop's potential is sky high.
Did you catch that?
Sky high. The market for the hemp seed or the hemp grain has been expanding 30 to 40% every year.
Alberta now leads the country in hemp production, 6,400 hectares last year, an estimated 8,000 this year.
Hemp is the perfect crop to avenge the CWB. It grows sky high in our climate, and honestly, it'll only become more viable as the planet warms. This perennial is great on water, acts as a killer cover crop, and slots right into your crop rotation. A co-op and land trust-based supply chain could sustainably produce a wide variety of products.
Automobile composite parts, bricks made out of hemp, pet food, cosmetics, clothing. I was absolutely blown away by the industrial potential for the plant.
It's now legal to use all of the plant to produce everything from denim and diapers, to cardboard and fiberglass, to semiconductors and, well, birdseed. Hemp is an eco-socialist's dream come true. It yields 4 times the biomass material of a 25-year-old forest in just 90 days. It requires fewer chemicals like pesticides and actually removes toxins from the ground. So it seems like we should invest in high-value crops like hemp or oats for a low-water milk alternative, and focus on regenerative agriculture. We can adopt a planned system of agricultural development based upon scientific soil surveys and directed towards better land utilization for the whole of Canada. We've already got the world's best fertilizer after all. And zooming out, the Green New Deal is a perfect vehicle to deliver on all our basic needs. What's the government's plan for that anyway?
We are 77 megatons short of meeting our climate target. We have identified 225 odd megatons in reductions. We're 77 short from meeting, and we've said we would exceed.
When?
I will be bringing a new plan to COP26, which is in the fall of next year.
So a year after the world's biggest climate strike, Liberals are still a year out from having a plan. Was that what Trudeau was out protesting? They could look to the government's GHG emission report for where to start. It shows that the oil and gas and transport industries have had the most dramatic increases over the past 30 years, representing 52% of our GHG emissions and growing. Emissions from the oil patch have doubled in that time, and within transport, the biggest growth comes from freight trucks at more than a 300% increase. Freight rail, on the other hand, grew by only 6% in that time. And in electricity, only natural gas emissions are increasing, a jump of more than 5 times from the 1990 baseline. So it's pretty clear where we should be focusing our decarbonization efforts. And of course, it goes without saying that this is a systemic, not an individual issue. We know that 100 companies produce 71% of emissions, and the richest 10% produce 5 times as many GHGs as the poorest 50%. Canada is second to only the US in that context. So rather than just banning straws and not planting trees, we should organize publicly owned and operated essential services.
The cooperative movement offered hope for a better life to the people of the world.
It created the Saskatchewan Bus Transportation Company. The venture put taxpayers in busing, said Douglas, because the Greyhound people only operated between the main cities.
What about a nationalized bus service, for example? Private companies like Greyhound rely on government funding to stay afloat. They've already been pulling out of the West, and in the East, Acadian bus lines did the same, leaving people in rural Maritimes without service. The fight for public transit to be expanded and free can address so many social and climate issues, but when the government isn't playing the jurisdiction card, it slaps conditions on transit funding, with provinces forced to match Trudeau's latest investment, which meant that New Brunswick just didn't take it, and Ford told Ontario transit agencies to cut lines and look at microtransit to access the funds. That means that ride-hailing and private bus companies replace our public services. Take Edmonton, for example. They cut around 100 lines and then shifted to the tax dodgers at Uber. Innisfil, Ontario did the same, and in the first 3 years, the cost of subsidies increased 5 times, while the ridership grew by less than 3. But of course, selling out transit to Uber isn't the only transport modernization issue. 99.75% of our rail lines still need to be electrified, and these centuries-old lines need maintenance. Take the line to Churchill, Manitoba, one of the many victims of capitalism.
Fierce storms and floods earlier this year devastated the rail line, cutting Churchill off from the rest of Canada. A port that once shipped Canadian wheat to the world lies rusting, abandoned.
We're all going through this climate change period that we need to deal with, and so governments need to really invest in that.
There's little doubt that warming temperatures and changing weather patterns here in the north have turned Canada's only northern seaport into a town with a very uncertain future.
Privatization meant the CWB could no longer coordinate with the line and the Port of Churchill, which left millions of tons of grain stranded in 2013-2014, costing the prairie economy $5 billion. And we should look at the unified model that was used to nationalize the CN in the early 1900s. Henry Thornton visited every small town along these lines and spoke to the people there. Each one was an opportunity for community development and improving accessibility. And you can't talk about nationalizing infrastructure without talking telecoms. Forget about foreign competition, we need universal high-speed internet access. We're getting gouged with some of the most expensive rates in the world, and we know it too. When surveyed, half of customers of the big three say they feel trapped by the oligopoly. 2/3 of us are seeing rates increase, but only 10% are getting better service for it. And half of us agree this faux competition model is anti-consumer, leaving 90% of us frustrated with the situation, and in rural areas that climbs to 96%. And it's no wonder, since the government's own stats show that only 40% of rural communities have access to broadband internet speeds, with on average 2/5 the download speed and 1/3 the upload speed of urban areas. In fact, as recently as 2015, many in rural and northern Ontario were still on dial-up, and rural service expansion for 200,000 people was cancelled out of petty spite. All this when the CRTC designated broadband internet access an essential service. It's a basic right that people need to work from home or just download the COVID Alert app.
Big telecom companies have made $7.5 billion in profits, and they receive millions in handouts from this government. Now, we New Democrats believe we need to make life more affordable for Canadians. That's why we're putting a cap on cell phone bills. Will the Liberals finally stand up to telephone companies, to telecom companies, and protect Canadians instead of those big friends?
Oof, such courage. What I'd love to hear him say is control of finance is the first step in the control of the whole economy. And maybe you're a budget hawk. How will we pay for it, your smooth brain says? Modern monetary theory can help us frame the investment from the state level, and on the community or personal scale, we need to root investment in public finance by bringing back postal banking. A 2013 CCPA study showed that the corporate banks closed more than 1,000 branches in the 2000s, and another in 2014 showed that nearly half of rural communities with a post office have no bank or credit union. That number climbs as high as 84% in Newfoundland and Labrador. And when the banks decided to close even more branches in 2017, rural communities across the country grabbed their pitchforks to fight for their branches. So when the postal union is advocating for the service, but the big banks are fighting against it, it's pretty clear we need to be pushing for more than just pilot projects.
Now is the time to invest in the projects our country needs and the people who can build them. Let there be no mistake about it.
All of these bold plans aren't even controversial. When polled, Canadians young and old say they're hurting, and they're worried about the negative impacts on health, racial and social justice, and their employment. We want to tax the rich, stronger labor laws, and more control for people, not corporations. And most of all, we want our society to be more self-sufficient and sustainable. We're clamoring for big, bold ideas, with 2/3 of us looking for an overhaul of the status quo. And that's where we come in, because it's clear we're going to have to take this power back. And keen viewers might have noticed how all these leftist ideas are solutions for rural communities too. We need to outline a new path towards global solidarity and make farmers socialist again. This isn't big government, but instead a decentralized democratic republic of communities and institutions operating in tandem towards common goals. Because now we're up against this.
I'm going to repeat it because it's so important. Whether you're black, white, brown, or from any race or creed, whether you're LGBT or straight, whether you're an Indigenous Canadian or have joined the Canadian family 3 weeks ago or 3 generations ago, whether you're doing well or barely getting by, whether you worship on Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, or not at all, you are an important part of Canada, and you have a home in the
Canadian left. He almost got me there. Because we can turn this into this, if only we have the courage we used to.
My message to the people of Canada is this, that if we could mobilize the financial and the material and the human resources of this country to fight a successful war against Nazi tyranny, we can, if we want to, mobilize the same resources to fight a continual war against poverty, unemployment, and social injustice.
Because if we don't do it, we're going to be left with this.
It's about doing for our kids and grandkids what our parents and grandparents did for us. And let's face it, if we've got a better opportunity than they had. Our debt to GDP ratio is low, and interest rates have never been lower.
Whoa. I don't even know how to respond after something like that. Wow. Jesus. How did you put that together? That is amazing. Because I think 2 weeks, I'm stunned right now. Sorry. Can you talk about your process while I try to find my brain?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this one started. It kind of came out of discussions we've been having at IDC. Strategy of going forward, and just sort of like everything seemed to connect for me at the same time. I had just read a couple books that was sort of like related to the nationalization of industry and stuff like that, and I had been reading history books about the NDP and the CCF in the past, just sort of like the broad left and this idea of planning our way out of the climate crisis and obviously the health crisis and the incoming crisis of fascism all at the same time seems like kind of like almost an obvious idea, and so I just started after collecting some more of those old I did a week of research into sort of like the history piece specifically around planning, and then a week of research into farming and agriculture, and then from there it was just the usual process of like I had identified some of the tentpole things I wanted to cover in the video, laid that out in a skeleton, dug up a bunch of news clips and that kind of thing, all that good old footage that I found, and then it's a process of just like grinding out the best parts of these clips and finding like the studies that back up the points that I'm trying to make, and and then selectively choosing the facts that I like and assembling it all.
Nice. I guess the one thing is that is such an amazing video, another masterpiece. You have an incredible video resume. Good Lord. It is dense. Like, where would you suggest we start organizing to make this thing a reality?
Yeah, that's honestly one of the things that I wish I could have covered a little bit more in the video. I tried to strike a balance between the actual structures of organization that is more covered in like the first half of the video, and then some of the particular things we can do to address the issues. And so that was one of the things that I in retrospect would maybe cover a little bit more, is specifically how some of those things work and how to think about just new ways of organizing ourselves. Nationalization doesn't necessarily mean that we have to wait for Trudeau or whoever to, buy up a pipeline or, hopefully something better and bring it into public ownership. There are ways we can we can organize ourselves, right? Like if you look at the CWB and sort of like the Saskatchewan wheat pool before that, that was just a group of people who all got together, looked at the facts, said, the way that this was organized during the war period was more beneficial for us. This is the structure we want, and then just willed it into existence. Obviously they had to have someone on the parliamentary end to help them implement that, but through the power of their union and just like their collective power, we're able to make that happen, right? And I think that there's the 4 things that are covered in social planning for Canada aren't even all of the structures, right? Like now, I honestly don't know the history of mutual aid groups too well, but that's something that's really popped up during the pandemic, and that's not covered there. Where you're then going down into like local communities and finding needs on a very a level that's in people's like lived experience, right? You're working with your building or your block, in the community, and forming organization around that. There's it seems as though a lot of our organization is either like unions are very labor focused, and then everything else on the activism side is like topic focused. And I think both of them do have values, but I do think that there's like the mutual aid group fits an interesting piece that's kind of like a neat in between, where it's like giving people that social power to organize themselves towards a variety of ends, right? Like you could organize, if you organized a mutual aid group within just your riding, you could try and game the election to get a new city councillor or MP in or whatever. But you can also then organize those people towards tenant unions and that kind of a thing, and building if you have a couple buildings with tenant unions, that's one thing. But then if you have your entire with tenant unions, then that's an even much more powerful piece, right? So I think that's one of the key takeaways from me, is like finding the variety of organizational structures that you can use, right? It can be a co-op, it can be again a union or something like that, and seeing how you can apply that to your real life, and sort of building off some of these other ideas that have been mentioned, right? Like connecting with your community in a very real and visceral way, and showing that the value of horizontal power, and rejecting these ideas of individualism that have been forced into the zeitgeist for decades now.
And usually, one of the things too is there's so much to talk about there. I think one of the things that really I think is compelling about that video too is it talks about rural workers, which seem to have been ignored by almost everyone. Where in the past, like I know that's something that you're passionate about. I think you're doing organizing there with some exciting people. Is that something you can talk a little bit about how important it is to have that segment of the population back?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's why, one of the reasons why anyway I made agriculture and farming one of the bigger tent poles in the video, is because they are largely an underserved group, farmers, but rural communities in general, right? When you look at their needs and the sort of like the issues that they want addressed, it's all of the same things we want, right? It's healthcare, it's education, it's access to just having a bank branch or something like that in their community, right? Like those are very lefty needs, or things that we can help address, right? And the other thing is like, I grew up in the suburbs, but sort of like on the edge of a farming community, and for them, we have this idea that they're like beholden to the conservatives or whatever, like they're more right wing, but I don't think that that's true in my experience with them. And I think that they're with farmers in particular, they sort of go where the money is, for lack of a better phrase. They're looking for ways to continue sustaining themselves, right? It's difficult, really. To be clear, like, I did a lot of research into this because I was loosely familiar, but then also like just had no idea really of like the inner workings. And I found this one video which was super eye-opening. It was an American source, but looking at their expenditures of like over $1 million in a year, and even with that, they come out negative 100 grand or something like that. And this is like, that's just the reality, right? They're dealing with these huge amounts of money, and that's like, it's a core factor for them, right? They're factoring in, my friend whose family has been like farmers for generations. His dad will know every eruption that happens across the globe, because that will affect his crop, in X amount of time, once the soot or whatever crosses the atmosphere and into like his region. And these are the types of things that they're thinking about. And so if we can help address some of those issues of, again, like the healthcare, the financial piece, and organizing themselves as well, you can see the value of their organization from them, right? We're learning from the farmers of old how to organize co-ops. And I've kind of gone off on a tangent here.
I think it's all gold, though.
Thanks. But like, there's what I was trying to say was like, they're not beholden necessarily to any ideology necessarily. They're just regular people like us looking for help. And I think empowering them through things like community land trusts and that type of thing, right? There's all this. The other factor is that like a lot of them have all this money in terms of like net worth, but it's not like lucrative, or it's not like liquid, money. And so like, it's sort of like when they're running these deficits every year of their operation, they're not able to like actually use that money. But if we were to create these sort of like pools and co-ops and that type of thing, that allows them to invest in the community, right? Like, there's a lot of energy used in farming, and so like getting them to pool their money together into like community wind farms and that type of a thing that are owned by them. That's one of those things where it's like, that's the small government piece, where it's like I think they understand that the climate crisis is happening. They're not climate deniers as much as like the media makes them out to be, rural people in general, kind of thing. But that gives them the power to like take that level of control back. It's not this like big government puppet master thing. Like, forget all of that. Those are just lies you've been fed, and we've all been sort of like fed. And so that gives them the power to control their reality and like actually affect some of those bottom line things, like energy, like water access, and like access to healthcare, right? If you're able to pool your money into these like development things, like a community land trust, right, then you get to decide what happens in your community. It's less, it's a way to like rethink our relationship to government, if we sort of like really just seize that power back. I don't know. Oh, I've rambled and completely lost the plot now.
No, I enjoyed that so much. Thank you. I guess like one of the things that I keep coming back to too is one of the things I really enjoy about videos is they're so well researched. As a part of that, I'm sure that you're just destroyed with the statistics that tell a story of where we're headed as a society, and yet you still seem so happy the whole time, even now. What is your secret for staying happy and keeping the good vibes during dark times?
Honestly, I don't know. I think I'm like the eternal optimist. Like even accepting and acknowledging that I think the climate crisis is gonna get us in the end. Like I don't know, like just keep going and doing whatever you can to like do that harm reduction, I guess. And like I also, as much as I think that like we're going to be facing some severe consequences, like if we don't organize around it now, like that's only going to get worse. And I think from being more of like a traditionally Canadian exceptionalism, liberal-minded person only a few years ago, and finding this like great community that like looks at the problems and has like actual responses that are going to like work according to their analysis of those material conditions. Like that's actually quite a hopeful thing, and I think to an extent like being able to laugh at and like kind of like ridicule these like just so blatantly broken systems is like one thing that keeps me going. I throw a lot of those clips of Trudeau and others in there to just show how it's all they're just talking out their butts the whole time, and like kind of using their own words against them to make my own point is like really fun for me. I don't know. That one where he says where he says it's just our nature. Like, oh geez.
I thought you edited that at first. I was like, wow, what is sleazeball?
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's interesting. I wonder then, as someone who comes from that like kind of Canadian exceptionalism, which I can also share that same background, like what was it for you that helped kind of open your eyes, and not just open your eyes, but make you feel compelled to be a voice for change?
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like, I always, even coming from that mindset, always thought, quite highly of my progressivism and that type of thing, and realizing just how misinformed or underinformed perhaps I was as well. Like that was like that lit a fire under my butt a little bit, and made me want to do the research, right? Like I've it just I don't know, it made me want to really like get these things out there. As soon as you learn something like just the real inner workings of how much like the climate crisis is already affecting us, and poverty is affecting people, and the opioid crisis is affecting people. It's one of those things, as like an Aries type of person, that like I just have to be like, no, like let's go. We have to all. There's so much we have to do. Like why are we all just like hanging around? It's like incredible to me that this deep into the COVID crisis, that we're all like still pretending that we can just like go back to regular. That's just so blatantly untrue. How are we not organizing around like just meeting those basic needs, and like not putzing around with like reopening bars and that type of thing, and I think seeing other people who we've had on the stream, Christo Avalise and David Dole, finding them like kind of late last year, among others, Thought Slime, Mexi, other people in the community doing it from the Canadian point of view, which was a very new thing to me, even just last year. That was really inspiring, and I wanted to get my own voice in the mix there, and just sort of add to that body of people who are spreading all this knowledge.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for doing that. Like, for real, sometimes 2020 gets so rough, and then you look at like people like you who've really come out this year, and it's been pretty exciting, feeling like maybe there's momentum, maybe we can make a difference, maybe if it's too late to like stop the climate change, maybe we can figure out a way to survive in the dustbin that follows.
Yeah, exactly, right. The inevitable IDC commune will be like a really lit place to live when everyone else is like, I don't know, burning or whatever.
Exactly. I should say we're down to our last 5 minutes here. Would you like to wrap up with final thoughts?
Yeah, I guess the thing I'd like to leave people with, if my pitch for the idea is like, I've really only gotten started on some of this research. I read as much as I possibly could in like a matter of a couple of weeks. I always link a lot of like sources in the description of my videos and that type of thing, and like keep going, right? There were so many other things I wanted to cover in this video that got cut for time, like a circular economy of waste management, healthcare, education, obviously the renewable energy piece we just talked about. Like all of these things could be factored into planning. And I think, if like, harking back to the Alberta Advantage one there, if they're looking at sort of like the first step of what we can do to organize ourselves, I think we also need to have this like I think I use the words like the democratic like federation of communities or whatever. I think we really need to start getting into that mindset of like, think so corny, but like think global, act local, and like plan the world we want to see. It's like kind of utopian, but like if we don't, the status quo will only continue. It might get like marginally better here and there, but it could also get marginally worse. So we have to sort of like design the world we want to see and like start organizing and taking some of those steps. And if we can, right, if we can prove that land trusts work, and if we can prove or like have it be proven to us that like co-ops of farmers and other people who are like producing things and like factoring as much as we can into it, then it sort of like stifles the opposition to it, because you can say, well, this is working for them. Here's the stats, they're benefiting. And then the one sort of like B side, which is another thing I'm quite upset that I wasn't able to like address more concretely in the video, is like we need to factor in land back and Indigenous rights into all of these decisions, right? That's why I really love the idea of this like cooperative and horizontal model. Is it gives us an opportunity to connect with their traditional modes of governance and ensure that they have a say, and a say that's not in sort of like the bourgeois governance styles that we accept as like the reality of how we're governed and we're ruled and stuff like that. If we're able to have a sort of like governance structure coming from them that's also informing some of the more localized structures that we build for ourselves on any given issue or topic or community or whatever, then that gives it gives them an opportunity for their own self-determination, and gives us an opportunity to respect their own self-determination as well, which I think is like extremely crucial for us to actually approach reconciliation in a way that's not just like what's happened so far. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Oh, well said. No, well, thank you so much. I guess everyone also would like to know, when are we be able to watch that video on our own? Is it coming soon?
Yeah, I hope so. I'm going to take a little break because I spent like the last week just cramming this one out. But I'll fine tune a couple of those little things in there, and I'll probably release it in the next like week or two. I don't know, something like that. To keep an eye out. You'll know when it comes out.
Nice. Okay, everyone, just like rewind 50 minutes and enjoy the best video you've seen this week. Waffle, thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is really awesome. This entire conference is incredible. I'm really hyped on it. I think this is the start of the revolution, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe that's too much of that optimism coming out. I don't know. I've had too much sugar today.
Yeah. No, I feel it. It's good energy. All right, well, enjoy your weekend.
Yeah, you too. Bye, guys.
Awesome. So I think that was an amazing video. Please go and watch that. All of Waffle's content is so well researched and well put together and well edited. It's just a delight every time you get to watch one of his videos, and it's always good vibes too the whole time, which you need if you're going to be diving deep into some of these ugly topics.